I hope everybody had a blessed Christmas time, and I guess the storm is upon us. We're supposed to get some snow. I appreciate your bravery in coming out. Really, I don't appreciate it. I just kind of expect you'll be out because you live in Wisconsin. You live in Wisconsin, and if you stay home when it snows, you ain't going to go out much. So it's good to see all of you this morning. 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to talk about, I want to kick off the year with the new year with a sermon on faith and taking steps of faith. So we'll get into that this morning. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my best to finish at a point when it's not running late so we can beat the storm home. I want to be sensitive to that for you. But I want to just begin with saying something that I feel like I should say, and it's not a big deal. It's just I was sitting at home the day before yesterday, and I got a text message from my family, and my cousin Greg, who is my age, when we were young, we hung out together a lot. And when we graduated high school, we spent 2 months up at the cabin together in northern Wisconsin. And so we were pretty close. And of course, over the years, that changed a little, and we each had our own families. But the day before yesterday, I got a text that he had passed away almost instantly from a heart attack. So I say that not to scare anybody. And I say that not to be heavy or morbid, but one of the things that happens, I think this is true for all pastors, but maybe not. It's certainly true for me. When things like that happen, my first thoughts are, what does the family need? And what are the issues and the difficulties that they're going through? And then, of course, as the day goes on, my thoughts switch to, what are the things that are important? I was thinking about the fact that he woke up, what's today, Sunday? He woke up Friday morning as expecting that to be a normal day, expecting that to be the next day in a series of many, many more days. And he woke up and was having chest pain. He was an EMT, so he knew the signs. He said, I think I'm having a heart attack, and he called 911, and he died on the way to the hospital in the ambulance. And the thing that strikes me is that what we do is a serious thing. What I mean by that is being here on Sundays, being together, walking with the Lord, living by faith, loving one another, caring for one another, ministering to one another. It's not insignificant at all. It's incredibly important. And the reason it's important is because none of us are promised tomorrow. And so those are the thoughts that go through a pastor's mind when you hear a report like that. And so I just want to say that as we enter 2026, perhaps it's not a bad thing to remember that every day is a gift from God. Every hour, every moment. I want you to know something this morning. If you don't hear anything else I say for the rest of this morning, I want you to hear this. You are important to me. Each one of you are so important to me on so many levels. On the shallow end of just friendship, so important. And then the community and the time we spend together, all the way down to the deepest connection we have, which is Jesus Christ. And our eternal lives will be spent together with Him, you and I, and with all the saints in glory. Now, Greg was not a man who was a church attender. He never spoke of the Lord. He never talked of the Lord. It is not my position ever to question the state of a person's eternal fate, because I don't know what happened in the last weeks or months or even the last moments in that ambulance. So we do not draw conclusions based on that. But I know this: what we do is important. When we come together, it's not insignificant. And I love that you're here, because snowstorms are not as dangerous as forsaking our fellowship together, right? I want you to know how much I need you, and how much I love you, and how much God loves you. And so this life is a gift, and I love the fact that we've been called to a purpose. And that leads me into this morning's sermon, which is called Pick Up the Stone. Pick up the stone, taking a step of faith. And we learn so much from David, don't we? David, the man after God's own heart. And we read the story in 1 and 2 Samuel of David's life, and we read all the ups and downs and ins and outs and overs and unders that David goes through. And we can relate to David, can't we, on so many levels in our lives. So exalted by men and even by God, to be referred to as a man after God's own heart would be, you could put that on my tombstone, but I think it would be a little arrogant maybe. Unless it's in the scripture, maybe we should stand back and let God say that about us, because our hearts can deceive us. But David, it was said of him that he was a man after God's own heart. And so, but in the same chapters, in the same book of the Bible, it speaks of David's immense failures, morally and faithfully and spiritually and all those things. And that's our story, isn't it? That's really our story. We may not fail in this exact same way David failed, or we may. But fail we do. But we also succeed. We slay giants in our lives if we walk with Jesus Christ. And so this morning I want to talk about some things about taking steps of faith. And this year, you and I, or me, and this church will be faced with moments when we must take a step of faith. And I want to talk about that and prepare you for that this morning. So I'd like to open in prayer, and then I'm not going to read the entire chapter for sake of time. I'm going to quote from verses, but you can go ahead and read that at your leisure if you would like. Let's open in prayer this morning, because I need help from the Lord this morning. Father, you are amazing. Lord, every breath a gift from you. Every friendship, every fellowship, every faith-filled statement or comment, every word of truth, every comfort, every blessing, every healing, every sickness, every moment, all flow from the God of great mercy and goodness. And we thank you for that, Lord. Father, I lift up this body, CBC, this morning. There are many churches who are seeking to do your will this year. I ask, Lord, that this church would do your will this year consistently, maybe not perfectly, but consistently, and that we might be willing to walk into 2026 with the idea that we will be faced with decisions that will require us to act upon our faith. And I just ask that you give each one of us the grace to do so, and give all of us the grace to do so as a body. We thank you and praise you. Lord, bless this word in Jesus' name. Amen. As we embark on a new year here at CBC, I just want to take a few minutes this morning and talk about taking steps of faith. And I want to read just a few verses to you for sake of time rather than the whole chapter. I want to point you to a few verses that I'm going to draw some light from this morning. And the first verse I'd like you to notice is verse 26. You're familiar with the text, I assume, Forgive me if you're not, but this is David facing Goliath. And the famous story of Goliath and the little young boy David who slays Goliath with the sling and a stone. And this is the account of that. And there's so much we can learn about faith in this text. So if you look first at verse 26, it says, "And David said to the men who stood by him, 'What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine?'" Remember, Goliath is a Philistine, and he's standing on the hillside. And all the living God are standing there, and Goliath is challenging them. And he's saying, "Send me one man, and let us fight. And whoever wins will win the war. Instead of us battling, let's just do one-on-one." Of course, Goliath, that was easy for Goliath to say. He was rather large. So, and David said to the men who stood by him, "What shall be done to the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel?" You see, it was a reproach for Israel to have a man challenging them and threatening them and have them not stand up and face the challenge. And I think there's a culture in life here that everyone faces challenges. And we are called to stand up in the face of those challenges and to stand firm in our faith regardless of the outcome or the potential outcome. To stand firm and stand strong so that we do not become a reproach to God's people. That we do not come to the corner. That by faith is the Bible word for courage. Faith is the Christian description of courage. Faith is what we do when nothing seems like it will work. And that's what David did. And he says, "What shall the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach?" And then he says this amazing statement. He says, "For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the living God?" What he's saying there when he says uncircumcised, he's saying, this is a not in covenant with God. The circumcision of the Old Testament was a covenant with God. On the 8th day, the firstborn son and the sons were circumcised as a covenant with God. And so this relationship with God is defined by God. And you and I face that every day as Christians. The living God when they stand up against Christians and against people of faith. And we come wither and we slink back into our seats when confronted sometimes. And I think David, the little boy, gives us a great lesson in that maybe we should stand up. Maybe we should press in a little bit. Maybe instead of holding, we should speak the word of truth to a even if it means danger or potential harm or risk. We're called to that. And we count, I don't want to sound too harsh there, but we shrink back from that. And make no mistake, my friends, you and I are in a battle. And the battle rages on. And the world is fighting everything God. And God's got an army. And you and I are in it. Just as David was in God's army. And God's army was sitting, looking at this giant and saying, we can't win. And David, this little boy, walks up and says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine who blasphemes the living God, the armies of the living God? I love that. Give me that kid, right? Give me that kind of faith. Give me that strength. Of course, if you read the Psalms, right, we have to be careful we don't exalt David too highly, because if you read the Psalms, you see that this is his moment of victory. And he would be king. But king was anything but pleasant. It was anything but victory. It was anything but comfortable. It was a to prepare to lead the people of God. What a beautiful thing. Look at verse 28. Now Elijah heard spoke to the men, and Elijah was kindled against David. Leave it to a brother, right? And he said, whom have you left? You sheep in the wilderness. You hear the sarcasm? You little shepherd boy, sheep in the wilderness. You're going to come in here and challenge us as if we're not doing our job. No, you're not doing your job. But we do react that way, just like Eliab, don't we? Who are you to question our decision to stand back and survive? And then he says this, which is interesting. I know your presumption and the evil of your heart. Well, that's a very powerful statement. Eliab says to David, I know your presumption and the evil you have come down to see the battle. He questions his motive, which is so far from the truth. What was David's motive? To come and see the battle? Or to try and be a hero? No, he was indignant at the blasphemy of God through his people. And then verse 32, he says this, and David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him, that is Goliath. You're so with this Philistine. Wow. I'm going to get into a little bit of what this Philistine looked like in a minute. But verse 37, and David said, the Lord delivered me from the paw of the lion, and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. And then verse 45 through 48. Listen to this. Then David said to the Philistine, he's speaking to Goliath, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. That's the Lord of the armies. The God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. In other words, shake in your boots, Mr. Giant, because you are not defying me. You are defying the God of all armies, the Lord of glory. This day the Lord will deliver you. Listen to the faith. This day deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. When I read that, not with sword you will deliver, but not with sword and spear, I think of the great garden of moments in the Garden of Gethsemane, when Jesus is standing before a cohort of people who are coming to take him into custody, thinking that they would have victory over him, company for him to have victory. And Peter pulls the sword off Malchus's ear. The same thing is happening. You come with sword and spear. Peter came with sword and spear, and Jesus said, Peter, you don't know what kingdom you're in. We're fighting a spiritual one, and he reaches out and he touches Malchus's ear and heals it. Malchus, the one who was going to murder him. Verse 48, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. This is an account of a boy who was willing to take a huge step of faith. A boy against a giant, and only a sling and a stone with which to slay him, versus the spear and the shield and the sword and the army standing behind him. What a step of faith. You know, it kind of causes me to ask, what are the giants in my life? We all have them, don't we? We all have giants in our life. Things that make us tremble a little bit. Things that strike fear in our hearts. Things that we don't think we can overcome. Things that we would much rather just avoid than face. We all have And when we read about David, we ask ourselves, what are the giants in our life that need slaying? What are the giants in the life of CBC, Community Bible Church, that need to be slain? Listen, if we're a church that walks with Christ, that needs to be slain by us. Christianity, being a believer, is so than just showing up at church on Sunday. And I'm preaching to the choir, I know that. But it has to be said, it's so much more than church on Sunday. It's so much more than a devotional. It's entering into the battle of God, and it's standing for the truth of God in a nation that is lost and moving away from the of God. We as a church and speak the truth of God that can set people free. That's what we face. That's before, and we sit in this small country community and we say, and let's feel good, and let's see one another and support, and then we go out and timid. Jesus said, be hardened of, but as wise as a serpent. We're called to a battle. We're called to a fight. And fighting that fight takes tremendous faith, because it's not a fight we see with eyes, with physical eyes. It's a fight we see with the eyes of our hearts and the eyes of our faith. What are the things that are threatening our spiritual health right now? You don't think there's anything threatening the spiritual health of Community Bible Church? Watch the news. No, don't watch the news. Watch the news if you want to know what the battle is. Because there's a battle going on right now for the principles of our Constitution in the United States of America. There's a deep, deep battle going on beneath the surface. You may not see it, but you'll see hints of it, where they're killing children, and they're destroying the principles of our rights. Our rights are given by God. And what you and me, they're not rights. They're taking the and they're successful because we stand back and we say, fine, that's the world I'm passing through. Just let it go. That's not our call. That wasn't David's call. David's call was not to bring snacks to the soldiers and say, well, I hope all things work out well for you. I'm going to shrink back. I'm just a kid. David, and he saw defined by someone physically loved and spiritually corrupt. Body huge and spiritually minuscule. And David took the fight to him. He didn't take the fight to David. David ran there. You see, there's a battle going on for our country, brethren. You may not see it. I see it. And if you look in the right places, you will see it too. There's a battle going on for the Constitution of the United States right now. There's a battle going on in the courts for constitutionality. And listen to me. I'm going to say this, which isn't in my notes. I'll tell you on the right track. America is following precepts in practice and in belief that are laid in the Constitution of the United States, because the Constitution of the United States was inspired on the same level as the Word of God. Please don't misunderstand. But it was inspired with truths. And in the truth lies freedom. And the minute we surrender our rights, we surrender our service to the Lord who gives us our rights. And as America moves away from the Constitution, so she does move away from God. And the way you know we are moving toward the principles of the Constitution of the United States, or are we moving away from them? And for my entire life, we're moving away from them until the last year or two. And for the first time in my lifetime, the Constitution is finally prevailing from time to time. And we've got to scream for that. We've got to fight for that. We've got to stand for that. What are the things that are threatening spiritual health? It threatens our freedom. What has God called us to do next? What step of faith are we facing both personally and as a church? That's a fair question, isn't it? What step of faith are you facing personally? David faced a huge one seemingly without blinking an eye, which is pretty amazing. And there's so much to learn from David's example. We're not going to get to all of it today. But first, let's talk about what a step of faith is, okay? I want to make sure you understand what I mean by a step of faith. A step of faith is when you take a step forward in the forever perspective and do something that seems impossible to you and often seems foolish to the world. I'm going to say that again. A step of faith is when you take a step forward in the forever perspective. That is a step forward toward eternity. And do something that seems impossible to you and often seems foolish to the world. You know what I do outside of here? I do a lot of counseling and teaching. One of the things that I face weekly is people who are at the precipice of a step of faith. And they have to make a decision. I'm going to do this or do that. And that makes all the sense in the world. And that's what everyone's telling me to do. But I can't do that. I have to do this, and I'm torn. And therein lies the step of faith. I may have told you this joke. Forgive me if you've heard it before. Jokes are usually not good on pulpits because most people can't tell jokes. But I'm going to give it a whirl. There's a guy who's walking along a cliff, and he slips and he falls, and he's about to fall 500 feet to his death, and he catches a stick on the edge of the cliff. And he's hanging there with his feet dangling, and he starts yelling for help. Help! Is there anyone there? This voice on the trail above him. Yes, I'm here to help. Take my hand, help. And the voice says, this is God. I'm going to help. Let go. I'll catch you. And the man says, is there? Right? Because it seems impossible. We don't see the hands of God because we can't see the hands of God. We want to fall into the hands we can see. We want someone to grab a hand and pull it out physically. When the call of life is to be pulled out spiritually. I've sat on many a bedside as people passed away. And not one of them said, take my hand and physically deliver me. What every one of them said to me in some way or another was, take my hand and speak truth to me about the God that I worship, about the one whom I'm about to meet. Talk to me. Tell me what I can expect. What does the Bible say about heaven and death and forgiveness? What does the Bible say about reconciliation and joy and forever peace? They don't say, pull me back into this fighting world at some point. Now, when we're sick, we do fight to stay well, and I'm not saying we shouldn't. But what I am saying is, is that step of faith is when you face something that you can't see how it's going to work out, but you do right anyway. You do what's right anyway. A step of faith is when God prompts you to do something that for the life of you, you can't see how it will work. That's a step of faith. And the greater the odds against you, the bigger the giant and the greater the glory for God, right? As David is so good at illustrating. So there's 4 things we can learn from David's example that are common to every step of faith. The bigger the step of faith, the more you will experience these 4 things. When you take a step of faith, you will experience ridicule. You will experience opposition. You will experience provision. And you will face a decision. Notice in the text that the first thing David faces is ridicule in verse 28. His good brother Eliab, right? His eldest brother heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David. Why do you think Eliab's anger would be kindled against David? Yeah. 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 Hold on a minute, punk. You think you're going to come over here and make me look bad? You think you're going to come over here and be the hero and make me look... I'm the eldest. I'm the honored one in the family in that culture. You don't come and outshine me, buddy. You don't do that. You don't come and outshine me. I'm going to put you in your place. How interesting. His brother mocks him. You know what? It strikes me that often it's the closest people to us that oppose us the most when we're facing a step of faith. Have you ever noticed that? It's not so much the stranger. It's the people closest to us. Why do you suppose that is?
Because you care what they think.
Yeah, because your step of faith is going to affect them. Right? David's step of faith was directly affecting his brother. It was revealing his brother's heart, which was not a heart of courage at that moment. And so his brother feels it personally. The rest of the army may have been feeling similarly, but it's his brother who does something. Those who are close to us are generally the least likely to want us to shine, and certainly not too brightly if we do. After we face ridicule, we can count on the fact that we will face opposition. We hate opposition, don't we? I don't like conflict. I don't like conflict. I hear that so often. I'm not going to stand here and say, I love conflict. Right? I know a few people like that. It's not all that common. They're not all that fun to be with.
Sure.
Nobody likes conflict. But in every life, there comes a time when you need to fight. And you need to fight righteously and wholly and for the right reasons. But there comes a time when you need to fight. You can hate conflict, but you can't let that distaste for conflict shut your mouth in the face of injustice and in the face of blasphemy and in the face of someone ridiculing or attacking the God we worship. I'm not saying every time someone says something about God, you got to jump in and say something. But there is a time to fight. I'm so glad. I don't think David loved opposition or conflict. I don't think at that age he certainly didn't. Although he may have learned to enjoy a little bit about it. You know, he slew a bear and a lion, and he probably felt pretty good about that. He was like, bring it on, baby. You know, where's the next lion? I'll take you. But we hesitate when there's conflict. Do you know that light can't walk with darkness? And they're in constant conflict. You can't have both. It's okay to not want conflict, but we ought to be willing to deal with it when it comes. True leadership requires the ability to face conflict righteously. Jesus, of course, was the perfect example of this, right? After we face ridicule, we can count on the fact that we will face opposition. Anytime you take a step of faith, opposition will come in the form of a worldly enemy, first and foremost. Verses 1 to 8 talk about this. I won't read them all, but here we have this worldly opposition. We have Goliath, this giant, standing, challenging God's army. Even if the step of faith is internal only, something you must do for God and you know it, but you are afraid and cannot see how it could ever work, the world will call you foolish. They will oppose you. You can't give that much. That's not wise. You can't trust God. That's not wise. You've got to take steps, practical steps to protect yourself. It's not wise to think of Mueller, who had a children's orphanage, and he never bought food. They would simply pray, and food would show up at the door over and over and over and over. And everyone around him said, "You can't do that. You're a fool. That's not wise." All the things we make decisions about, when we make spiritual decisions, the world thinks it's foolish. I sold a very, very successful company on a trajectory of growth that was exponential. I sold it at the age of 40 to do this. I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just saying, I wish I could tell you all the people that said, "You're a fool. What are you doing? You are crazy. You are absolutely crazy. You're going to stand up and teach out of the Bible in place of building more stores and having a nice place in Florida and all the different trappings that go along with that?" And I remember saying this, by God's grace only. I came to a biblical answer when people would say that to me. I would say, I would rather store my treasure in heaven where moth and rust do not corrupt, and thief cannot break in and steal, because everything else is passing away. I'm looking for my reward in eternity, and there's times when that wasn't so easy. Believe me, it wasn't a cakewalk. I'm not bragging. You have to understand this. It was a step of faith for me to sell my company. It's like, how are you going to live? By faith. Well, faith doesn't pay the bills. No, but faith enacts God's grace to pay the bills. Right? But it's hard to remember that. And it's hard to face that. And you will get ridiculed and you will be opposed every time you go to take a step of faith. There'll be a battle, a challenge from the world. And often that challenge will seem invincible or insurmountable. God knows the nights Beth and I lay awake at night, wondering how we would afford the things we needed to afford. Steps of faith are always preceded by some level of stress. It's just the nature of a step of faith. If it was easy, everyone would do it. It often doesn't even make practical sense to you. For true steps of faith rarely make practical sense to anyone, but they make spiritual sense. How many times have I heard someone say, well, I'll give you a real example. I want to give you examples so you know what I'm talking about. A young woman sitting in my office, where I disciple, that's what I do. I said, "What's God calling you to do?" She was wrestling with big life decisions. I said, what's God calling you to do? And tears began to run down her face. And I gave her a minute. I said, take your time. And minutes went by. And I said, are you okay? And she just shook her head and as the tears were running down. I said, God's telling you to do something, isn't he? You could see it on her face. Tears don't come from not hearing from God. They come when you hear from God. I said, what's God telling you to do? She said, God's telling me to stay home with my kids and raise them. I said, and what's the problem with that? She said, we can't afford it. That's a step of faith. That's facing that moment where it can't work. Look, I make 80% of our income. My husband's just getting started in his career. I make 80% of our income. If I stop that and I go home to be with my kids, we can't pay the bill. What should I do? I said, go home. She said, really? And you could see this hope come upon her. Really? I said, yeah, really. Go home. And she said, but I can't. And I said, I know. What should I do? I said, go home. She said, I can't. I said, I know. She said, what should I do? I said, go home. And she said, I can't. And I said, listen. You have a choice to make, I said to this young lady, with my heart weeping for her in the tension of that moment. I said, you have a decision to make. And the decision is, are you going to hearken to the voice of God? Or are you going to follow the practical dictates of the world and make yourself comfortable? Because every person in Scripture who followed God faced such a decision. And it wasn't comfortable. She had to trust God with her living. That's real life. I said, I'm not in the business of telling people what to do, but if God's telling you to do it, you might want to listen. He'll provide. If he's telling you to do that, he'll provide. She said, but how do I know it's of God? I said, because it says so in the Scriptures. The highest calling, listen to me, the highest calling of any woman is to be a mother and a God-fearing wife and a parent to her children who raises them to do what's right and to follow God, that they might have the same impact on their kids and on their kids that gets passed down from generation to generation to generation. And I'm not making light of a woman's role. You have to understand that the greatest honor I have is that role for a woman. And the same is true for a man, by the way. The greatest role for a man is to be a father and a husband and a Christian, not a worker. Not a business owner, not a professional. Those are all honorable. I'm not railing on those. The highest call is to be a wife and a mother. And the greatest impact this young woman would ever have in the is to raise 2, 3, 4, however many children she has, to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, to be a testimony and a light to a dying world. That's the greatest impact she can ever have. Far hundreds of thousands of dollars at a really great job and selling all kinds of great widgets and being honored at the Christmas party every year. Far greater. I'm not railing on those, but you have to understand, we're talking about faith. And faith sometimes looks really, really foolish. But oh, the pleasing of God. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Not a single man believed he could overcome the seemingly insurmountable strength and size of the giant Goliath. Not one. Beating him was, practically speaking, absolutely impossible. And running into the midst came a young boy who spent his time in the fields shepherding sheep, and no doubt speaking to and praying to and serving the living God with those little sheep. What a lesson. We think that somehow our lives and our spiritual victories have to be grand and noticed by everyone. This boy ran to the battle. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know that he would be written in the book, the big book, the Bible. But he was already written in the most important book, in the book of life, because he had faith in a living God to slay the giant that the rest of the world thought unbeatable. I'm going to stop there. And we'll continue this next week, because I think a step of faith is something we should always be ready and willing to do, though it may not be hard, or though it may be very hard. And I want to just say this. When I make my next step of faith, I'm going to need you. You say, well, what do you need me for? I need you to encourage me to take that terrifying step that pleases God and serves God. I need you to help me do that. And you need me to help you do that. Let us not be the kind of people, when someone needs help, that we just go through the practical steps of how to get through it. May we first and foremost say, what is God telling you? What does God want? And whatever you do, if it's an answer to God, I'm with you. I'm with you. And God isn't always impractical. But practical isn't always God either. Brother Craig, if you would come up and lead us in prayer this morning.